Before we dive into today's terrifying tale, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a spine-chilling story. Let's get into it. Missed calls.
It all started one quiet night. I was already deep asleep when the shrill ring of my phone woke me from a dreamless slumber. I groggily reached over to grab it, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling that tugged at the back of my mind. The clock on my nightstand read 3 a.m. That alone was enough to make me hesitate for a second, but I was too tired to care. I answered, half expecting some random robocall or telemarketer, but as soon as I heard the voice on the other end, my sleepiness vanished. It was me. Or, at least, it sounded like me. My own voice, coming through the phone in distorted, strained bursts. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The voice was soft, trembling, almost pleading. "Victor, help me. It's so dark here. I can't breathe." My blood ran cold. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at the screen as if it might hold some explanation. The number was unlisted, just a string of random digits. There was no way it was a coincidence. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the growing sense of dread that was crawling over me. It had to be a prank. Maybe someone was messing with me, using some kind of voice-modifying app to make it sound like me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something felt off. The voice on the other end wasn't just distorted, it was desperate. The way it rasped, like it was struggling to say something important, sent chills down my spine. I hung up quickly, almost too quickly, as if I was afraid the voice would somehow reach through the phone and drag me into whatever nightmare was on the other end. I tried to go back to sleep, but the feeling of unease kept me awake. What the hell was that? But the worst part, the phone didn't stop ringing. The call was over, but the fear lingered. The next night, the same thing happened. I was awake this time, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the eerie feeling that had followed me since the first call. The clock read 3 a.m. again. My pulse spiked, and my hand instinctively reached for the phone beside me. It hadn't rung yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. The minutes dragged on, but there was no call. I tried to convince myself it had just been a weird coincidence. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe I had just imagined the panic in my own voice. But then, it rang. The screen flashed to life, and I saw the unlisted number staring back at me, just like before. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to answer, but I couldn't ignore it. Not after the terror from last night. Maybe, just maybe, it would be different this time. Maybe it would stop. I swiped to answer, holding the phone away from my ear, expecting to hear a strange prankster's voice. But this time, it was worse. Far worse. It was my voice again, but this time it sounded wrong. The rasping, desperate tone from last night was back, but it was louder, more frantic. The words, God, the words, twisted in a way that sent a wave of panic through my body. "Victor, I'm trapped. It's too late. You have to listen. I'm dying." I froze. I could feel the weight of my own breath against the phone as I tried to process what I was hearing. This wasn't a joke. Whoever, or whatever, was on the other end of the line, it wasn't just someone messing around. It was me. It was me. The voice on the other side sounded like it was suffocating. Like it was drowning in something dark and suffocating. And then, just before the call ended, I heard a sound, a faint, almost imperceptible scraping noise. "Victor, it's already started." The line went dead. I was left in silence, staring at the screen, my hand trembling as I tried to catch my breath. That voice wasn't just desperate, it was terrified. And it was my voice. I didn't know what to think, but one thing was clear. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't a coincidence. And whoever, or whatever, was calling me, they were reaching out from somewhere I didn't understand. Something was coming for me. Something that had already begun. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear my own voice, strained and terrified, begging for help. I couldn't escape the feeling that whatever this was, it was getting closer. I had to know more, had to find out what was happening, why I was receiving these calls from my own future. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, the sunlight doing little to ease the creeping dread that had settled over me. I pulled up my phone and stared at the call logs. I hadn't noticed it before, but something was off. The number was the same as it had been the night before, unlisted, just a string of digits that didn't mean anything. But the strangest part was the date. It wasn't just from last night. The call had been placed 5 years in the future. I didn't understand how this was possible. How could I be getting a call from myself in the future? It didn't make sense. The more I stared at the screen, the more my stomach churned. I had to investigate. I started researching everything I could think of: time travel, parallel universes, anything that might explain how a call could come from a future that hadn't happened yet. But nothing seemed to fit. Nothing made sense. Then I started looking into the number itself. I dug deep, trying every online search, every forum, hoping I would find something, anything, that could explain it. And that's when I found it. A forum thread buried in some obscure corner of the internet. It was a long shot, but I clicked it, heart pounding in my chest. The thread was titled, "Anyone else getting calls from their future?" I clicked, and the first post made my blood run cold. It was a story almost identical to mine. The poster described receiving calls at exactly 3 a.m., each one more frantic than the last. It was the same message, a voice begging for help, claiming to be them, from 5 years in the future. The poster mentioned something else, something that sent a chill straight down my spine. The more calls I received, the closer the thing was that was coming for me. I scrolled frantically, hoping for answers. There were no clear conclusions in the thread, just people sharing their own terrifying experiences. But I couldn't stop reading. Every story sounded the same. And then one user posted a reply that made my heart skip a beat. "It's not you calling. It's you. Trying to warn you." I sat back, the words echoing in my mind. It wasn't just a random glitch. It wasn't a mistake. It was me, from 5 years in the future, trying to warn me of something coming for me. The thought made my head spin. I couldn't ignore it. But what was I supposed to do? How was I supposed to stop whatever was happening? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I didn't know. And the more I thought about the calls, the more I realized one horrible truth. I wasn't just hearing my future self. I was hearing myself, begging to be saved from something I hadn't even encountered yet. And it was getting closer. I needed to figure this out. And fast. Before it was too late. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on me, something unseen, but always just out of my reach. Every call I received from that cursed number made it worse. My phone vibrated beside me at 3 a.m., just like it had every night for the past week. I almost didn't want to answer, but I had no choice. This time, the call didn't end after a few seconds like it usually did. No, this time, my own voice, breathing heavily, gasping for air, spoke immediately, as if it were waiting for me to pick up. "Victor, listen to me," my voice pleaded through the phone, but it was far more distorted, more desperate than I had ever heard it. "You have to stop it. You have to stop it before it finds you. Before it takes you. Please, just..." The line went dead. I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, my heart thundering in my chest. Every instinct in me screamed to throw it away, to stop answering, but I couldn't. I was terrified, yes, but there was something in those calls, something about the sound of my voice that didn't just terrify me, it haunted me. It was the urgency, the panic. It wasn't a random noise, it wasn't some glitch or mistake. It was real. My future self was out there, or at least a version of me, reaching through time to warn me. I had to understand what was going on, what was coming. I had to find the truth. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning, unable to escape the suffocating fear. When the morning light broke through the blinds, I barely noticed. All I could think about was the next call, the one that would come at 3 a.m. every night, without fail. Days bled into one another as I scoured the internet for anything that could explain what was happening to me. I contacted people who had posted about similar experiences, but no one had any concrete answers. There were theories, of course. Some believed I was experiencing a form of psychosis, others suggested some kind of supernatural event, but none of it made sense. I wanted something I could grasp, something solid I could hold on to. And then, a new lead. A post buried in an old Reddit thread, from a user who claimed to know exactly what I was going through. I couldn't believe my eyes when I read it. I don't know if this is real, but I've been through this before. The voice you're hearing isn't your future self. It's you trying to reach out from the past. It's not a warning. It's a cry for help. You need to listen to the voice because what you're about to face will consume you. It's already too late, Victor. It's coming. My blood ran cold as I read the post over and over again, trying to understand what it meant. It was coming. What was coming? And why was it too late? I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. The walls of my apartment started closing in. Every little sound, every creak, every footstep became a harbinger of the thing that was after me. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and wait for whatever it was to come for me. The next call came. But this time, there was no voice on the other end. Only heavy breathing, like someone, or something, was waiting. Watching. I held my breath, waiting for the inevitable, but when the voice finally came, it was different. It wasn't my voice. It was a whisper. Too late. The line went dead again. I dropped my phone onto the bed and buried my face in my hands. It had started, whatever it was, had started. And there was no turning back. I don't know what time it is anymore. I don't know if it's day or night. All I know is that I can feel it getting closer. That suffocating presence. It's as if the walls of my apartment have become an extension of the thing that's hunting me. I've locked every door, sealed every window, but it doesn't matter. It knows where I am. It always knows. My phone is vibrating again. It's 3 a.m., just like every night. The same number. The same eerie feeling in the pit of my stomach. I've been dreading this call for days, but now I almost crave it. The fear has morphed into something else, something deeper. I want answers. I need to know what's going on before I lose my mind completely. I take a shaky breath and answer. The instant I press the button, the distorted sound of my own voice floods my ears, gasping for air. But this time, there's something else. The voice. It's different. There's no desperation anymore. No panic. Just calm. Victor, my voice says, so clear and cold, it chills me to the bone. You're running out of time. I drop the phone, my heart slamming in my chest. I don't want to hear it anymore. I don't want to know what's going to happen. But I can't stop myself. My fingers are shaking as I reach for it, bringing it to my ear again. This time, the voice is quieter, like it's coming from right behind me. It's me. From the future. You're going to die tonight. There's no way out, Victor. We both know what's coming. I freeze. The blood drains from my face, my hands clammy with sweat. My mind races, trying to piece everything together. A sudden thought hits me with terrifying clarity. This isn't just a warning anymore. It's happening. Right now. The fear that has been building inside of me, the feeling of something closing in, has reached its peak. The voice continues, and as it speaks, something shifts in my mind. This isn't me, I think. This isn't my voice anymore. I've been trying to tell you, it whispers, softer now. I've been trying to prepare you. But now, it's too late. The door is already open. It's already coming for you. Suddenly, the room goes cold. The shadows stretch across the walls, and I can't breathe. I stand up, my legs unsteady, my mind spinning as I turn toward the hallway. From the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of something in the reflection of the mirror. A dark shape moving, not my own, but something else. A figure. I stagger back, gasping for air, but there's no escape. My reflection doesn't move like I do. It's still, staring back at me, its eyes empty and black. It smiles, a grin that isn't mine, a grin that is far too wide. It raises a hand, reaching out through the glass. And for the first time, I see it clearly. A face. My face. I can hear the whispers in the phone again, but they aren't just words anymore. They're all around me. They're in my head, in the walls, in my skin. I feel it. It's here. The thing that's been hunting me, the thing that's been calling me, it's taken over. And now, it wants me. Victor, it whispers again, and I can't tell if it's coming from the phone or from behind me. It's too late for you. There's no going back. I turn slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. I can see it now, standing in the doorway. My future self. Only, it's not me anymore. It's something else. Its eyes are black, its smile twisted, and its hand reaches for me, a cold, clammy grasp that promises nothing but darkness. And in that moment, I understand. It's been me all along. The calls, the warnings, the dread, it wasn't from some future version of myself. It was me, reaching through time, trying to stop what I'm about to become. But it's too late. The door is already open. And now, it's time to switch places. As the darkness closes in around me, I can't scream. My voice is gone, just like everything else. All I can do is watch, helpless, as the last remnants of my humanity fade into the abyss.
The room with the locked door.
I moved into my new apartment a few weeks ago, and to be honest, I was pretty excited. It was small, but the rent was cheap, and I was looking forward to starting fresh in a new place. The landlord, Mr. Harper, was a quiet man in his late 50s, a bit strange but polite. When I signed the lease, he handed me the keys with a warning I found odd. "There's just one thing," he said, his voice low and serious. "Never open the door at the end of the hall." I must have looked confused because he quickly added, "It's not something I can explain. Just don't do it." I remember feeling a little unsettled by how urgent his tone was. But I figured every apartment has its quirks, right? I didn't think much of it. At first, everything seemed normal. I unpacked my boxes, settled in, and began to enjoy the peace and quiet of the apartment. The hallway was narrow, and at the very end, there was a door. It was an old wooden door, looking out of place compared to the rest of the apartment. It was locked, of course, but something about it felt off. I never thought about it much at first. After all, it was just a door, right? But then, a few days after I moved in, I started to hear things. It started with faint scratching sounds in the night. At first, I assumed it was just the building settling. But after a few more nights, I realized it was coming from behind that door, the one Mr. Harper told me not to touch. The sound was soft, almost like whispers. I couldn't make out any words, but there was a constant nagging feeling that someone, or something, was there. Just beyond the door, waiting. I tried to ignore it. I mean, it wasn't my problem, right? I didn't have to open that door. But then one night, the whispers got louder, sharper. And the door, it started to feel like it was watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling. I would lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. But there was something about that door. Something that made my skin crawl every time I passed it. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I hadn't touched it. I promised Mr. Harper I wouldn't. But deep down, I knew I was going to have to find out what was behind it eventually. I just didn't realize how soon that day would come. A week had passed since I moved in, and I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with the apartment. I tried to go about my daily routine, but the scratching, whispering noises behind that door continued, growing louder every night. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, but now, I wasn't so sure. The sound wasn't just faint whispers anymore. It was like someone was scratching at the wood, dragging something sharp across the door. Sometimes I thought I heard soft murmurs, as though someone was talking just beneath my door. I told myself it was all in my head. Maybe it was just old pipes or the building settling. But there was a strange weight in the air around that door, something that made my heart race every time I passed it. Why hadn't I noticed it before? Why did it feel like it was alive? I knew I couldn't keep ignoring it. It was driving me crazy. That night, as I was brushing my teeth, I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of something moving behind the door. This time, it wasn't just the scratching. I swear I heard a low, soft voice. It was as if someone was whispering my name, barely audible, just on the edge of my hearing. "Sophia! Sophia!" I froze, my toothbrush still in my mouth. I didn't know whether to laugh at myself for being so frightened or to run out of the apartment. My heart raced, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. I quickly finished brushing my teeth and turned off the bathroom light, hoping to shake the feeling. But the whispers, They didn't stop. I found myself standing in front of the door again, staring at the old, faded wood. The key was still in the lock, just as it had always been, and I had never even thought of touching it. But tonight felt different. The voices were louder now, more urgent. My curiosity gnawed at me, dragging me toward it. What was behind that door? I didn't want to open it. I knew I didn't, but I couldn't stand not knowing. The door seemed to be pulling me, calling to me, and it felt like I had no choice. My hand hovered over the key for a moment, my breath shallow, my palms sweating. The lock clicked as I turned the key, and my heart skipped a beat. The door creaked open, just enough for me to peer inside. The darkness on the other side was thick, suffocating. I squinted into the blackness, but saw nothing. I stepped into the room, my heart thudding in my chest. And then I saw it. A massive, old mirror leaned against the far wall. It was cracked, but the reflection it showed was wrong. It was me, but it wasn't. I stood frozen, unable to look away. The woman in the mirror had my face, my features, but her eyes were empty, hollow, black as night. Her lips curled into a sickening smile, a twisted mockery of my own. My stomach lurched, and I took a step back. The reflection in the mirror didn't move with me. She stayed perfectly still, her dark eyes locked onto mine. Then, as if it were waiting for me to notice, it smiled wider. Something was horribly wrong. The air grew thick with a presence I couldn't understand, a presence that was not my own. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the mirror, even though every part of me screamed to leave the room, to run. The reflection didn't stop. It twisted its mouth into a grin, as though it had a mind of its own. And that's when it whispered, its voice low, raspy, and cold. "It's time to switch places." I stumbled back, my hand on the doorframe, but I couldn't move fast enough. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes again, the reflection wasn't mine anymore. I was looking at something else. Something wrong. I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to get out of that room before whatever was happening consumed me. But I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen in place, staring at the reflection in the mirror, unable to tear my eyes away. The thing in the mirror, it wasn't me anymore. It had my face, my body, but the eyes. Those black eyes, so empty and hollow, like there was nothing human about it. The smile twisted wider, so wide it almost seemed to stretch beyond what was physically possible, the edges of its lips curling up into a grotesque grin that made my stomach churn. And then it spoke again. This time, its voice wasn't just a whisper, it echoed in my mind, reverberating through my skull. "It's time. You've been in my place long enough." I felt my legs buckle beneath me. I tried to back away, but my feet felt glued to the floor. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. The thing in the mirror, no, it wasn't a reflection anymore. It was alive. It was real, and it was waiting for something. Waiting for me. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog in my mind, but the words, the voice, they filled my head, drowning out everything else. It was like a weight pressing down on me, pulling me into the mirror, into its darkness. "You should have listened to the landlord. He tried to warn you. I don't know why I didn't leave. I don't know why I stayed. But something about the way it looked at me, that sick, twisted smile, felt like it was expecting me to do something. It was as if I belonged to it now, as if it had taken root in my mind, controlling me from the inside out. I stumbled backward, my hand gripping the doorframe, and when I finally managed to tear my gaze away from the mirror, the apartment seemed off. The air was thick, charged with something I couldn't understand. My pulse raced in my ears, and a cold sweat clung to my skin. Was I losing my mind? I glanced back toward the mirror. The thing was still there, but it wasn't just standing anymore. It was moving, moving like it was alive in the real world. I rushed out of the room, slamming the door behind me, but the feeling didn't go away. I could still hear that voice echoing in my head, still feel the weight of those black eyes, even with the door closed. I staggered back down the hallway, feeling lightheaded and dizzy, trying to shake the image of that thing from my mind. I needed to leave. I needed to get out. But where could I go? This apartment, this place, was mine now, wasn't it? The landlord had made it clear that I wasn't supposed to open the door, that I wasn't supposed to even know what was in there. But I had done it. I had opened it. And now it was too late. I could feel the walls closing in on me. The whispers were back, but they weren't coming from the room anymore. They were coming from inside my own head, from behind my eyes. And when I closed my eyes, all I could see was that smile. That horrifying, twisted smile. The next few hours felt like a blur. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the thing in the mirror. Its eyes, those empty, soulless eyes, were watching me, waiting for me to do something. I didn't want to go back to that room, but part of me knew I had to. I had to face it. If I didn't, what if it came for me? I didn't sleep that night. Not a single moment of rest. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, of that face in the mirror, those black eyes staring at me, haunting me. Every time I blinked, I could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on me. Every creak of the apartment, every whisper of wind through the window, felt like it was coming from that room at the end of the hallway. I didn't want to go back in there, but I couldn't avoid it. I knew that if I didn't confront whatever it was, it would consume me. I didn't know what was happening, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the apartment was changing, warping around me. It felt like the walls were closing in, like it was alive. And it was waiting for me to make the next move. Around 3 a.m., I stood at the end of the hallway, staring at that door. The one that had never been opened before, at least, not by anyone who lived there. I couldn't explain why, but I had this overwhelming compulsion to go back. To see it again. To understand it. Maybe, just maybe, if I did, it would stop following me. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest, and reached for the doorknob. It was cold to the touch, like the metal had been frozen. My hand trembled, but I didn't pull away. I couldn't. The door creaked open, and I was hit with that familiar coldness, the same as when I first stepped into the room. But this time, the mirror wasn't the same. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. It felt wrong. There was no more glass, no more edges. Just blackness. A void. A presence. I stepped closer, my breath shallow, my heartbeat loud in my ears. It was like the mirror was calling me, begging me to step inside. But before I could move any further, something caught my eye. A shadow flickered, just out of sight. I froze, my body stiff with terror. The air grew colder. I could feel the temperature drop in the room, and my breath started to form clouds in front of me. I backed away, my legs feeling weak beneath me, but when I looked toward the door, it was shut. It had closed on its own. I tried to open it. The handle turned, but the door wouldn't budge. It felt like something was pushing against it from the other side, like the room itself was resisting me, refusing to let me leave. Panic surged through me. My throat tightened, and I banged on the door with my fists, shouting for someone to hear me, for anyone to come, but no one did. The apartment was silent, just the sound of my breath, ragged and heavy in the air. That's when I heard it. A whisper. So soft, so quiet, but unmistakable. "You're mine now." I spun around, but there was nothing there. No one. The room was empty. The mirror was gone. Instead, there was only darkness. I tried again to open the door, my fingers numb from the cold, but it wouldn't move. I pushed with all my strength, but the door stayed shut. And then, I heard it again. "It's time to switch places." I was hyperventilating now, my chest tight, and my vision was beginning to blur. I couldn't escape. I couldn't breathe. Then, the door opened. Slowly, creaking on its hinges. I stepped back, but I couldn't move far enough. Something was drawing me in, pulling me closer, as if the very room itself was swallowing me whole. The darkness beyond the door beckoned, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent, like they were in my head, not just in the air. I didn't want to go in, but I had no choice. My feet were moving before I could even stop them, my body betraying me as it crossed the threshold. The room felt alive in a way I couldn't describe. And then, the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside. The last thing I remember hearing was that voice. No, not a voice, something far worse. It wasn't a sound I could hear. It was inside my mind, deep, low, and relentless. "Welcome home." And then, everything went black. I don't know how long I was in there, trapped in that suffocating darkness. Time didn't exist anymore. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. It felt like I was being consumed, swallowed whole by the room itself. The darkness pressed in on me, like it was trying to crush every last ounce of life out of me. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. Every instinct told me to get out, but my body was frozen, paralyzed by the sheer force of whatever presence was in that room. And then, like a switch flipping, everything changed. The air grew still. The oppressive weight that had been pressing down on me lifted, and I felt a strange calm, like I was sinking into the softest, most comforting embrace. But it wasn't right. Nothing about this was right. I opened my eyes. At least, I thought I did. But something was wrong. The room didn't look like it did before. The walls, once black and suffocating, were now white, sterile. The light above me was harsh, blinding. The floor felt different. I wasn't sure where I was, but it wasn't the room I had just been in. This place was cold, clinical, almost lifeless. And then I saw the mirror. It was no longer a reflection of me. No longer the version of myself I knew. The figure staring back at me was a stranger, an imposter, a twisted version of me. Her eyes were black, no whites, no irises, just voids. Her smile, no, it wasn't a smile. It was something more sinister, more malevolent. I reached up to touch my own face, but I didn't recognize my hands. They were wrong. The skin was too pale, the fingers too long. I felt the urge to scream, but when I opened my mouth, the voice that came out wasn't mine. It was too deep, too distorted. I stared at the mirror, at the woman who wasn't me. And then, I realized with a sickening jolt that she wasn't just in the mirror. She was me, but not me at the same time. She was the version of me that had taken me. She was the one who had been waiting to switch places. I watched in horror as she started to move. Her actions were too smooth, too perfect. She reached out to the mirror, as if she were touching me. No, not touching me, but pulling me in. I felt myself being dragged, my body fighting against it. But there was no escape. It was like the world around me was slipping away, like I was losing control. My body, my mind, everything was slipping out of my grasp, and that thing in the mirror, that version of me, was taking it all. I felt the weight of it, the realization that I was being replaced, that I had been the one trapped in the reflection all along, that I was the other version, the one who never belonged in this world. The imposter smiled, and I felt the last of my strength leave me. I wasn't fighting anymore. I wasn't even sure I could. Then, in an instant, everything stopped. I was standing there, she was standing there, staring back at me. But I wasn't in control anymore. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And somewhere deep inside, I realized with a sickening certainty that the thing in the mirror wasn't just a reflection. It was me. And as the darkness swallowed me whole once again, I heard her voice, the voice that had taken my place, whisper softly, "Welcome home." And I knew that I would never leave this place, never escape the mirror, because now the reflection was the real one.
The reflection that wasn't mine.
I never paid much attention to the mirror in the hallway. It was just there, a piece of glass framed in cheap wood, reflecting my tired face every morning and night as I walked past it. It had always been normal. Until one night, it wasn't. I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water when I glanced at the mirror out of habit. My reflection looked back at me as usual. Same messy hair, same dark circles under my eyes. But then, as I turned to leave, I noticed something that made me freeze in place. My reflection had blinked. It sounds stupid, I know. People blink all the time. But this was different. I hadn't blinked. My reflection had done it first. A strange chill ran down my spine, but I shook it off. Maybe I had blinked without realizing it. Maybe I was just tired. It was late, after all. I grabbed my water and went back to bed, pushing the thought to the back of my mind. But the next night, it happened again. This time, I was more careful. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my own face, waiting. My eyes burned from keeping them open for so long. Then, just as I was about to give up, I saw it, My reflection's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. I wasn't smiling. I stepped back, my heart pounding. The smile was gone, my reflection perfectly normal again. Maybe it had been a trick of the light. Maybe I was just imagining things. Or maybe something was very, very wrong. And I had no idea how much worse it was about to get. I avoided the mirror for the next few days. It was ridiculous, I knew that, but every time I walked past it, a tight knot of unease twisted in my stomach. I tried not to look, keeping my eyes forward, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Then, one night, I gave in. I stopped in front of the mirror and faced myself, breathing deeply. My reflection stared back, perfectly normal. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe it really was just my imagination. But as I turned away, I caught something in the corner of my eye. My reflection's head twitched slightly, like it had started moving before I did. I spun back, heart hammering. The image in the mirror was still, copying my posture exactly. My mind raced for an explanation. I had been sleep-deprived lately. Maybe that was affecting my perception. I lifted my right hand. The reflection did the same. I blinked twice. So did it. Then, I took a deep breath and whispered, "If you're real, do something." Silence. I let out a nervous laugh. What was I expecting? A response? But then, just as I was about to walk away, my reflection tilted its head to the side. Just slightly. I hadn't moved. A cold wave of terror washed over me. I took a slow step back, eyes locked on the mirror. My reflection straightened its head, mirroring my movement perfectly. My breath came in short, panicked bursts. I was losing it. That had to be it. Then, just as I turned off the hallway light, I heard it. A whisper. Soft, almost playful. "You're starting to notice." The voice didn't come from my own lips. It came from inside the mirror. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whisper again, replaying in my head like a broken record. "You're starting to notice." By morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. Sleep paralysis, maybe. I had read about hallucinations happening in that half-awake state. That had to be it. Still, I avoided the mirror. I showered with the bathroom door cracked open, just enough to keep the hallway reflection out of sight. When brushing my teeth, I kept my head down, never meeting my own eyes. But paranoia has a way of sinking in, no matter how hard you fight it. I started noticing small things. Objects slightly moved when I knew I hadn't touched them. The door to my bedroom was cracked open wider than I remembered leaving it. And then, something worse. I was heading to bed late at night when I saw a smudge on the mirror, like someone had pressed their fingertips against the glass. But it wasn't on my side. It was inside. I wiped at the surface, but the smudges remained, untouched by my hand. My stomach twisted. I took a step back, pulse pounding in my ears. And then, my reflection blinked. But I hadn't. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. My reflection stood still for a moment. Then, it smiled. Not a natural smile. Not mine. It was wider, too wide, stretching beyond what was humanly possible. I turned and ran. But as I sprinted out of the hallway, I heard something behind me, a soft tapping, like fingers drumming against glass. It wanted out. I locked myself in my bedroom, my chest rising and falling in sharp, panicked breaths. I tried to convince myself it was stress, exhaustion, anything but what I had just seen. But the sound, the tapping on the glass, it hadn't stopped. Soft at first, like fingertips barely brushing the surface. Then louder, more insistent. I grabbed my phone, my hands trembling as I dialed my best friend, Mark. He answered groggily. "Dude, it's past midnight. What's going on?" I hesitated, my mouth dry. What was I supposed to say? That my reflection was acting on its own? That I was losing my mind? I forced a laugh. "Nothing, man. Just a bad night. Thought I saw something weird." "You okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Yeah, I'm good." I wasn't. The tapping had stopped. The silence was worse. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smile. The next morning, things got worse. When I finally gathered the courage to leave my room, the house was quiet. I moved carefully, checking each mirror as I passed. The hallway mirror was normal. No smudges. No tapping. Maybe I really had imagined it. I let out a breath and walked to the bathroom. I turned on the sink, splashed cold water on my face, and against every screaming instinct, looked up. My reflection stared back. Normal. Tired, but normal. Then, it blinked. With the wrong eye. I froze. My left eye had twitched shut, but in the mirror, it was the right. I took a step back, my stomach churning with cold dread. The reflection didn't move. It just stood there. And then, it grinned. I stumbled back, knocking over a cup. The sound of shattering ceramic barely registered over the pounding of my heart. The reflection took a step forward. But I wasn't moving. And then, in a voice that wasn't quite mine, it spoke. Almost time. I couldn't breathe. My reflection had just spoken to me. Not mimicked, not delayed, it had spoken on its own. Almost time. I backed away, gripping the edge of the sink so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind screamed at me to run, to look away, but I was frozen, trapped in the pull of my own twisted image. The reflection grinned wider, too wide. Its lips stretched past what was humanly possible, revealing teeth that weren't mine, weren't anyone's. Then it moved. Not just a twitch or a blink, it stepped closer. I wasn't moving, but my reflection was. It pressed its hands against the glass, from the inside. I felt something cold brush my fingertips. A touch. Not from this side of the mirror, from the other. I yanked my hands away and staggered backward. The glass rippled, like water disturbed by a single drop. The thing in the mirror pressed its face closer, its eyes locked onto mine. And then, it knocked. 3 times. Soft. Deliberate. Waiting. I bolted. I ran out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps as I grabbed my phone and called Mark. Straight to voicemail. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to stop it. Then, a sound from the bathroom. Not the knock this time. A soft creak. Like a door opening. No. No, no, no. The bathroom door was still closed. It wasn't coming from there. It was coming from the hallway mirror. Slowly, dreading what I would see, I turned my head. The mirror was no longer reflecting the hallway. It was reflecting something else. A room. Dark. Shifting. Wrong. The walls twisted like they were breathing. The air inside looked thick, almost alive. And in the center of it, something stood there. Me. Or at least, something that looked like me. It raised a hand, smiling that same awful, stretched grin. And then, it stepped out. The last thing I remember before everything went black was its voice, whispering in my ear. Your turn. When I woke up, I was standing in front of the mirror. On the other side. I pounded against the glass, screaming, but no sound came through. I could see my room, my house, everything. And I could see him. My reflection, the thing wearing my face. It turned to the mirror, looked directly at me, and gave me a final satisfied grin. Then it walked away, leaving me trapped. Forever.